Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. I think it is important that we start by acknowledging why this issue matters so much. It isn't just because it speaks to an SNP government which has lost control. It isn't just because the story is another example of the secrecy and cover-up which has tainted the SNP's approach to so many of the scandals rocking this government, from ferries to public safety or to the state of our NHS. It is both of those things, but most importantly, it's about this SNP government being held accountable for their decisions and conduct during the most tragic event in living memory. During the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic in Scotland, thousands of our fellow citizens died. Young people saw their education disrupted at levels we've never seen before, and with consequences we still don't fully understand. Untested and COVID-positive patients were sent into care homes with devastating consequences. People were shut away from seeing friends and family. People fell sick and were left to die alone. Their families mourning alone. That's why every ministerial decision and the conversation that informed them weighs so heavily, not just on the politicians who made them, but in the homes of every single family across Scotland. That's why this issue matters. Because across this country, people deserve the truth about how these life and death decisions were made. And this isn't just about learning the lessons for the future, it's also about delivering clarity and hopefully some closure for so many people living with heartache across our country. The least Scots could have expected was that their government would make getting the truth as easy as possible. But, Presiding Officer, that has clearly not been the case and not the strategy adopted by this SNP government. Despite claims from Humza Yousaf as far back as May that the Scottish Government should be, in his words, absolutely open and transparent, we have seen attempts to withhold vital evidence from the inquiry, all while changing the excuse every time the story fell apart. In June, I asked the First Minister directly, and I quote, "Will he confirm that all ministers and officials, past and present, have complied with the Do Not Destroy instruction, and will he give a guarantee that all requested emails, texts and WhatsApp messages will be handed over in full to the inquiry?" He gave a direct and simple answer. He said, and I quote, "Yes, they will." No equivocation, no caveats, no grey area. He went on to say, and I quote again, "To ensure that there is simply no doubt whatsoever, any material that is asked for, WhatsApp messages, emails, signal messages, telegram messages or whatever, will absolutely be handed over to the COVID inquiries and handed over to them in full." His words. His response was either hubris, naivety, incompetence or perhaps all three. Regardless, it's clear that it must be referred for an investigation into misleading this Parliament. And in June, the First Minister told the Parliament, "I will give way."
Douglas Lumsden. I thank Anas Sarwar for giving way. From what he's explained, it's a very serious matter. Do you not does he agree with me that it would be more relevant for the First Minister to be here today to listen to the arguments being made?
Anas Sarwar. Well, I only hope, yes, in ideal circumstances, I think the First Minister should be here. I can only hope that he listens to this debate or at least reads the transcript of the debate. I know from the last 2 weeks he hadn't certainly read the transcript of the COVID inquiry, but perhaps he'll take the time to read the transcript of this debate. In June, the First Minister told the Parliament that the Government had, again and I quote, "a long-standing policy on retention, including email and social media messages." Then it transpired that Nicola Sturgeon and Dacian Leach had deleted the WhatsApp messages, and the First Minister then changed the story and told the media that the Government, and again I quote, "had a social media messaging policy which actually required us to routinely delete WhatsApp messages." Required us to delete routinely WhatsApp messages. Then the Deputy First Minister told Parliament that 14,000 WhatsApp messages would be handed over to the inquiry, and then suddenly the First Minister, having told the inquiry he didn't have WhatsApp messages, miraculously found an old phone with his messages from the time and says he will hand them over to the inquiry. Now, what I don't understand is, I don't understand whether he misled the inquiry and is now clarifying, misled Parliament and is now clarifying, or or maybe he just broke the own guidance he's saying the government had about actually requiring us to delete WhatsApp messages. I mean, was he breaking his own policy? Utter confusion, utter loss of control and utter confusion. I will give way. I hope we get some clarity from the Deputy First Minister.
Deputy First Minister.
I've been very clear in my statement and what I've said today, and that is that the requirement around messages, whether they're WhatsApp or anything else, is to transcribe any decision-making into the corporate record. Anas Sarwar surely understands that no organisation can keep every single message about every single thing. It would not comply with the law to do so. So the requirement is that messages that contain important salient information is transcribed to the corporate record, but they should not be retained forever, because that would be a breach of the legal obligations of the organisation.
Anas Sarwar can give you the time.
That's an even more confusing answer, because what the Deputy First Minister is saying, that the First Minister has breached the guidance of the government, because he's saying he's kept all his messages and will hand them over, but somehow the guidance is that messages have to be deleted. It's complete and utter chaos. And to put it into context, the government supplied 14,000 messages. Matt Hancock alone, one person, as opposed to 70 officials and ministers, one person handed over 100,000 messages to the COVID inquiry, compared to 14,000 messages. I'm aware of time, but if I'll get time back, I will. I can give you the time back. Deputy First Minister.
Just to be clear again, and today I have updated Parliament that there are 28,000 messages that have been transferred to the inquiry, but in addition to that will be the individual responses to the inquiry, which I haven't seen, but no doubt will contain WhatsApp messages and other elements of material as well.
Let's listen to the person who is the chair.
I'm sure the Deputy First Minister's fog brain would have sounded like clarity to her, but it doesn't sound like clarity to anyone actually watching. What remains unclear is whether the First Minister told the inquiry he didn't have messages. Was it before or after having committed in June to supplying all the messages in full? Perhaps time will tell on that. But, Presiding Officer, that's not all. 3 weeks ago, counsel to the UK inquiry stated that they'd asked for the Scottish Government for copies of informal messages such as WhatsApps in February. And on the 31st of October, the Deputy First Minister told Parliament that the UK inquiry first asked for messages in September. The First Minister repeated that claim on the 2nd of November. He said, and I quote, "The messages were asked for in September, just a matter of weeks ago." Both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister directly contradicted the counsel to the inquiry statement on the 26th of October. And it was only after being forced by the UK inquiry that the Deputy First Minister sought to correct the record. And if that were the extent of the falsehoods, Presiding Officer, it would still be an open-shut case, in my view, in terms of that investigation on misleading Parliament. But the reality is, it goes further, because the true scale of the cover-up that many fear is taking place is still unclear, because this SNP government has repeatedly refused to answer even some of the most basic questions. Now, the inquiry has made clear that there's no issue with confidentiality with some of these basic questions and answers. So that's just another falsehood and false excuse, from this government. The First Minister still failed to tell Parliament, of the 70 ministers and officials, how many have failed to comply with the Do Not Destroy notice and how many have deleted messages. Still no answer. Why did the Scottish Government hand over redacted legal advice to the inquiry when it provided legal advice in full to other judicial inquiries in the past? Still no answer. Now we've had a clarification that there will be the supply of unredacted legal advice, but the question still remains, Deputy Presiding Officer, why does it take the UK COVID inquiry fighting with the government to get legal advice they're entitled to? Why does it take this government being shamed in this Parliament for them to do what they've done for every single judicial inquiry in the past? But it's also been reported that SNP ministers and special advisers use SNP and private emails accounts to communicate. So I ask again, how many emails from SNP accounts have been handed to the inquiry? How many? And if none, why not? Now, in closing, counsel to the UK inquiry has said that if the information now provided by the government is insufficient, the inquiry will want to know why. But so too will this Parliament. Presiding Officer, the First Minister has lost control of his government, and he, in my view, requires to be referred for an investigation into misleading this Parliament and trying to cover it up. We were promised full transparency and cooperation with the inquiry. but they've failed. And as much as they try and hide and hope it all just goes away, for the sake of the families, they must and will be held to account.